Hey there, Internet. So I finally finished up getting stuff ready for my Duggar's video about shiny happy people, and I may split this into pieces somewhere between the 15-20 minute mark because I've got 3 pages typed out of notes that I pre-did. Almost. Huh. Somehow I ended up with something weird. There. Now it says 1 of 4. So, anyway. So, Shiny Happy People, the Amazon series. My wife watched 19 Kids and Counting years ago. I really didn't. Had some friends that watched it. Didn't really care. Didn't watch Counting On or the other one. Didn't really follow the Duggars. But my wife wanted to watch it, so we did. And it was very clear very early. And I kind of figured someone's going to have an axe to grind. It might just be the kids having an axe to grind with the parents at the time before we started watching it. Before we started watching Shiny Happy People. It was very clear early on that as far as trying to be fair to all concerned without some other major obvious agenda, Tiger King did a better job. Now, so maybe someone had an agenda with Tiger King, but they were better about hiding it because they at least tried to make it look like they were trying to be fair to Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin, and with, a couple of other people that had tigers thrown into the mix. And honestly, if this were just a matter of the kids having issues with their parents or TLC, I would shrug my shoulders and I wouldn't be making this video. If they're just going after the Institute in Basic Life Principles, I wouldn't be bothered. People are going to have their issues with religious organizations that they were once a part of. They say, the most devout people to a religion are often the people that convert to it, and the biggest opponents are the people that leave it. Kind of like with, ex-smokers are the worst about being anti-smoking. But here's the thing is, this doesn't just go after that. It goes after all conservatives. And who are both political or religious, and we can't ignore it. This doesn't mean we should take the side of the people who made this, but we do ignore it on our peril. The Duggar's response statement was just simply the producers can have other motivations, including ones that differ from the people they interview. That is true. It starts off, however, with Duggar daughter Jill Dillard says, "There's a story to be told, and I want to be the one to tell it instead of the tabloids." Fair on her part. She does talk about good memories of when she was younger with her dad and whatnot. And they do try and ask her questions early on about her brother Josh's crimes, especially toward her and her sisters. But she declines, saying, "I don't want to put out anything more." She actually, during the series, expresses regret talking to Megyn Kelly, some of those kind of things. But there is definite bias there, and we don't know what was left on the cutting room floor. There could have been stuff where Jill Dillard or her cousin may have said things that were much more positive that they just simply snipped out because it didn't fit an agenda. We don't know. I'm not going to opine upon it. I'm also not going to sit there and try and say the people that issued accusations against Bill Gothard, his relatives, other people with IBLP I'm not going to try and denigrate that because in some cases it happened and in some cases it was beyond the statute of limitations. But as far as other things, there is definitely some other agendas here. I'm not going to shill for the Duggars or the IBLP. Honestly, I hadn't heard of the IBLP before watching Shiny Happy People. I have my own issues with the Duggars from before this was put out. Some friends of mine like to watch it. And I read some article. I'm like, yeah, these people have had too many kids, because I actually used to have a bumper sticker on my old truck that said, if you can't feed them, don't breed them. I very much believe in that. That's why I'm very much against the welfare system. The idea that, once you're needing help, it's time to stop having kids when you can't support yourself. And an article seemed to put out that they had to have some help from their church to get into a bigger house or make their house livable for the number of kids that they had at the time. I very much believe in that. So even if you're needing to go to the food bank, it's time to stop having kids. Sorry. There's other means other than birth control if you think that's the cause of various health issues. There were some things that seemed extreme to me in that whole thing where, when kids have to start spending their time with the buddy system and acting like a parent instead of being able to just be a kid, you've had too many kids. That buddy system, it just seemed to take away the older kids' childhood and adolescence so the parents could keep cranking out kids. Now, in this, doing some research, I did talk to, in the end, 3 pastors. 2 that I knew from before and 1 more that I actually just got a chance to meet. Because I don't like to throw people under the bus or put them on the spot, it's just random. Pastor D in Cedar Woolley, B in South Carolina, and C in Lake Stevens. They're all conservative. One has a family almost as big, and while I'm not going to use the word cult as a hard line of what they are, I'll leave all that and the critiques of the views of the IBLP theologically to better theologians than I. But I'm going to stop short of using the word cult myself, but there are those kind of qualities. Throughout the series, you never see anybody trying to defend the Duggar parents or the IBLP. And I understand how Gothard or the Duggar parents might want to say, look, these people are going to have an agenda. Everything that we say is going to get cut up and changed around, and it's not going to be put in the right context, so we're going to write it off. But in an organization supposedly as large as this, that you can't find somebody who's been in it or is in it or is affiliated with it or has been affiliated with it that's willing to defend it, I'm going to call crap. So you don't ever hear another side in the series. Usually you can find somebody at least dumb enough to go in front of a camera and say, oh yeah, I'm all for this, and then even if it does get all cut up and made to look dumb, make them look even worse than they maybe are, or maybe they are actually genuinely good people. All the big families I've known, genuinely good people, but this whole thing does try and paint conservative Christians, and most of the large families I know, which we'll define as over 4 kids, they're usually conservative. Not exclusively, but in my adult life, most are. So, episode 1, it concentrates on the Institute for Basic Life Principles and the Duggar family and why people get into the IBLP. Most seem to be people having trouble in their family with school and their children, teaching values, in some cases, child discipline. In other words, it's the very issues people have had since the beginning of time. There are people seeking answers to regular, everyday problems. And the IBLP provides answers that maybe even work for some people. But each episode has a teaser for what's coming in, for the next one, just shifting a bit in what their narrative is. Episode 1's really a lot of setup, a lot of slap, the things you would expect to hear of, I'm this person, this was my relationship to this is why with people that left, those sorts of things. Episode 2, though, starts introducing people beyond the immediate friends and family. With a pastor by the last name of Pease. I did not write down his first name. I wasn't going to watch the series a second time clear through. I watched episode 1 twice because I realized I'm going to have to take some notes, so I went and watched episode 1 so I could make a few notes. Episode 2 starts introducing, there's a pastor, that's definitely in quotation marks. Last name is Pease. The guy, I checked his social media, I looked him up, and he was clearly very theologically liberal. Now, if you've followed any of the news, like where they had the legislators get kicked out of the Tennessee legislature, One of the people kicked out's a younger man in his 20s, I think. He's trying to pretend to be the old, African-American civil rights pastor, trying to imitate that. And his cadence, the way he talks, he's trying to do that. And I think it's an act, because I've seen video from when he was in college and he was wearing a nice suit and tie. Talking about, we need to get moderates together and get everybody together, instead of his very confrontational attitude now. And the guy, this pastor, supposed pastor, shared a clip of that guy doing his sermon. It says, "Great sermon," and he's wearing, I think, a rainbow stole. It says, starts off with, saying, with the words, "Holy God, Father God, Mother God," and it's like, okay, right there, we're just going to write you off if you're a Christian. And it's like, that's not how it goes. I just, in my mind, roll my eyes and on both of them and question how much they actually follow the Bible. So the one pastor they actually get on there is pretty questionable, and he immediately goes into how the IBLP only wants white Protestants, and they're all about abusing women. I will concede they're probably very dominated by people who are of European ancestry, but I would not just assume that everybody involved with IBLP is going to be that, or that they actively try and discourage anybody who is Black or Hispanic or Asian from being involved. I don't know of any evidence to that truth. I didn't see anything on the IBLP website implying any of that when I did a cursory look over of it. Multiple women also start to appear in here, who are, of course, are either ex-IBLP. One described herself as ex-Quiverful, and nearly all of them now are wearing the Kool-Aid colored hair, and when I checked into any of them, they are, again, very liberal. Outside the Duggar and Duggar relatives, that's pretty much a common theme, is anybody who is critical is going to be liberal. So you're not going to see a person that's still theologically conservative, politically conservative, saying, here's the problems, outside of any immediate people with immediate connection to the Duggars. It very much concentrates exclusively on the IBLP and Bill Gothard, the history behind him. There's a look into a lot of the cult-like extremes about what media members could allegedly consume. So they couldn't have any video games. They could only watch stuff on VHS or DVDs, and it had to be approved by the IBLP. No TV. Board games were supposedly even restricted, so you apparently couldn't get a good old cutthroat game of Monopoly. I'm guaranteeing you Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop war games were probably out. They allege ideas of Gothard claiming Cabbage Patch dolls are possessed. Now, I like to watch paranormal on tape. Dolls are inherently creepy, but I honestly don't think that Cabbage Patch dolls are possessed. But if that's among the weirdness, there's plenty of weirdness in the IBLP if all of this is true. But you start to see this larger agenda coming out, because they start taking shots at homeschooling, talking about how they wanted to get homeschoolers involved with them. Some materials that people were allegedly using were creepy as far as what they actually taught, but also when it came to human growth and development, as we called it when I was in school, or as the school called it. Of course, the rest of us all call it sex ed. It went into its own creepiness. And this is where I really wanted to talk to some pastors. Was when I started getting into this episode. I didn't ask all the pastors the same questions, the same exact questions. But I did ask their views on some of this, and all three pastors I talked to, when I asked them about what they thought of the IBLP, they said they're very legalistic. In the series, there is a clip of kids singing, "Why Should I Not Go to Hell?" When I discussed that with one pastor on the phone, he said, in South Carolina, he's the one in South Carolina, he said, we decided that he agreed that that's inappropriate. It seemed to me that it was totally not proper for a kids choir, and probably more appropriate as a theme for a adult Bible study. But it was, and maybe it's taken out of context. I mean, let's be fair. It could easily have been edited for maximum shock value. But there's some other videos going around where we get a pastor calling up, and where it's very obvious the kids' idiot parents. It had been scripted, so if I just had a boy to show you how the proper way to discipline a child, and then here's a child, and he comes up and he demonstrates how to spank a kid. Not hard, but completely humiliating to the kid. It shouldn't have happened. And I mentioned this to the pastor I was talking to in South Carolina. He said, "Yeah, no, that's a church discipline point of saying if that ever happens again, you're out, or even you're done as a minister with us." And there's another pastor that demonstrates how to use corporal punishment on a doll with a stick, and he's like, that would be another one. You're gone. Because that's just teaching child abuse. And this is, you can't put that in any other context where someone's got a doll there and they're showing how you can smack the doll with a stick. They have by then made the IBLP rightly or wrongly look abusive, and they in preparation for episode 3, because they always get these things you don't even realize they're transitioning into what's in the next episode. They don't say in the next episode. They just start shifting, start going after going after abstinence-based sex education and painting all fundamentalists as abusive. So then comes episode 3. It looks like I might have time to get this all in one shot. We'll try. It starts off calling all fundamentalism exploitive. This is when I talked to Pastor D, and he was a great help in me researching this. And I decided I needed to research what is an actual Christian fundamentalist, because whose definition are you using? Because I can see where that could be very broad or very narrow. In the first thing I did was I actually looked it up, and the first way I came up with for a definition said the Doctrine of Deliverance of 1910, which originated with Presbyterians. This isn't, some weird out there group. It was 5 points. Inspiration of the Bible by the Holy Spirit and inerrancy of the Scripture as a result of this. The virgin birth of Christ. The belief in Christ's death was an atonement for sin. Bodily resurrection of Christ. And historical reality of Christ's miracles. Those 5 points, which to me is just like Christianity 101. If you don't believe in those, why call yourself a Christian? That's not even getting into consider that conservative in terms of theological arguments, or a whole host of minor and major issues like the ordination of women, for example. That's your broadest brush. Typically now, it was explained that when they're talking Christian fundamentalism, you're getting into things that lend themselves toward patriarchal movements or the quiverful movements, which have a lot of overlap. But as a whole, they would go after, people writing this would go after nearly any conservative Christian. So for instance, if you're merely following the Bible of issues on sexuality, like saying heterosexual relationships in marriage are okay, everything else is not. Or if you're at the very minimally complementarian and just saying women shouldn't be pastors and that was it, as far as gender roles, they would probably call you a fundamentalist as far as the makers of this, the producers of this. It's not unlike the far leftists and the rest of society calling the regular guy from 5 years ago a right-winger. Elon Musk put out that meme. Why are you so extreme? I'm just a regular guy from 5 years ago. So you don't even have to be close to what the IBLP was described as to be considered a fundamentalist in the eyes of the makers of the series. It also tries to paint all conservative Christians as radical as them, and unfairly tries to connect the IBLP to politicians as in this is part of they're all crazy, in a similar way of trying to make media personalities and politicians look crazy or racist or fascist because somebody who is a fan, follower, or supporter is one. So this is where they'll talk about, oh, well, they supported Sarah Palin and Mike Huckabee. They're just run-of-the-mill conservatives. Sarah Palin certainly would not jive with the views of the IBLP, but they try and paint her as the same way. Kind of like when, this gal was on Tim Pool a couple weeks ago and in the morning on the new morning show and says, oh, well, Nazis like your show. And he's like, where are you coming up with that? Because somebody who been a mass shooter had a few screenshots with no context from his show on their social media. There are weird claims of prayer rooms at these camps and training centers, for instance, where an older girl sent a girl to a prayer room for an very, very extended period, not less like 30 minutes, but for like hours or a couple days, because she didn't like what shoes she was wearing. This is one person's story. It's not into the area where I'm not going to say it absolutely happened, absolutely didn't. This is also the first episode where they bring up that the older girls were not paid. Should be on 19 Kids in County and the spinoffs. And this is after they were 18 and their dad may have forged their signatures. And they said, well, the contract's with the family. I mean, as far as Jim Bob doing that is a seriously dick move, and he owes his older kids some back pay. That was not cool, period. I'm just going to believe him on that, especially where the older daughters for the spinoff series, they were the focus of it and weren't getting paid. If I'm sorry, but their husbands are lacking in my mind. Their husbands should have put their foot down and said, we ain't doing it, make us. And said, we're going to renegotiate that contract or you're not doing it. That's what they just should have put their foot down. And, minimum wage doesn't cut it for a show like that. It's also in this episode is accusations of Gothard fleecing the flock, and I think they include his brother in that. And there's sexual assault allegations, and he tried to countersue after they were past the statute of limitations, and the judge said, nope, they're not. This isn't. There's actual evidence that could have happened, so you don't get to nail them for legal fees. And of course, these things do happen in places with extreme teachings of any kind. It doesn't matter whether it's left or right, but they try and portray it all as on the right. It can't happen on the left because people that seek to become leaders, seek authority, also start thinking they're beyond reproach, as do their imitators. It's not exclusive to anybody. I mean, you get in the military, you get in intelligence agencies, you get in business, you get people that think that they can involve themselves with employees well below them, for example. I've been seen that around places I've worked. You find out that, the store manager got fired for doing something. Companies always try and cover it up. It doesn't fit. It doesn't stay hidden very well. Then in episode 4, they get into Josh's crimes. It spends a good amount of time on that, which, again, that would be something I wouldn't tie to the whole conservative movement. But then they intersperse it with trying to connect every conservative Christian to IBLP with nearly every homeschooler. It acts as if there's some grand conspiracy afoot to place conservatives in government. They get into what's called the Joshua generation. They have an ex-member who is brought forward to try and make this point. If you don't know, the Joshua generation was basically a bunch of conservatives saying we need to teach our children to be involved in civics, involved in politics, and how to get out there and make a difference. We see this all the time in schools, teachers pushing politics as truth. And I remember being down in Portland working on my aunt's estate, and I went out to get some lunch, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching a bunch of school-age kids when they should be in school having a little climate change march, and there's a teacher on either end of it. So We see in schools they give kids credit for involvement for left-wing causes, kids out of school for left-wing causes and rallies. So they teach politics in school. That's okay apparently. But when conservatives do it, they all lose their mind. And apparently do it better. They all lose their minds. Because, of course, conservatives are probably going to approach it in a more disciplined manner. And then we're giving all these images of military-like training facilities and some of the training centers, but we're not really given any context of why are they teaching them. They're trying to imply that like they're building an army intended for violence, and we just give a bunch of scary-looking video. It's not. This was a training center for kids that supposedly wanted to go in the army or anything of that nature. And of course, like with the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a joke, they try and imply that this is this big thing across the country, because the Southern Poverty Law Center, of course, will tell you they're just one donation short from keeping the Klan from taking over the whole country tomorrow. When the Klan is not, at most, less than a couple tens of thousands of people, if that. You might be hard pressed to even get to 5 figures, but you certainly don't get 6. And they're trying to imply that look at all these millions of people that have built this thing to be all scary, and there's not that many people involved at a given time with the IBLP or any of the such organizations, but they try and imply it is. So it's basically a slap at the whole conservative movement. It's basically a swipe at it, and they are talking about doing a follow-on series, but wouldn't appear until 2025. But we ignore this at our peril. If we ignore its presence, if we don't know what's in it, if we don't take it serious, people will watch it, people will believe it. They've been pushing it for the last 2 or 3 weeks on any of your news aggregation sites of, what are the Duggars doing now? They were out of the news for couple 3 years. Now I almost can't scroll down the Yahoo web front page without seeing something about them. And it's been a long time since I ever heard any mention of them. So we really need to be aware of what's being said, because we know that tale of, a lie can get around the world, all the way around the world before the truth gets its boots on. There's more to the world or the conservative movement than is implied in this. And we best be willing to say, look, most conservative Christians are not like the IBLP. Most conservative Christians are not sending their kids to some weird camp or training center. We might be teaching our kids now our values and that they need to be involved in politics, and that's a good thing. We should. Civics education in this country sucks. A lot of us want to homeschool kids because we think they'll get a better education, and that should include a better education in civics. But that's what went on with it. I'm not going to say you got to watch it. Might be a good idea if you really want to know. I think people that would be in positions to have to counter this, if you're in a leadership position, maybe within politics, maybe within your church, you might want to be aware of what's being said in here and even do a little more research. But until then, like, share, subscribe, and until I get another video up, you all take care.